The Hudson River Valley stretched before me like a watercolor painting, autumn maples bleeding crimson against West Point's granite walls. I'd driven this road from Washington, D.C. countless times, but today felt different. Today, I wasn't Brigadier General Victoria Sterling, the youngest female general in the United States Army. Today, I was just Vic, the family disappointment heading to my niece's graduation. My phone buzzed. A text from my mother. "Margaret, family meeting at the parking lot. Don't be late." No congratulations for Emma. No acknowledgement that I'd driven 4 hours to be here. Just orders, as if I were still the awkward teenager who never quite measured up. The massive stone gates of the United States Military Academy loomed ahead, their weathered surfaces bearing 2 centuries of honor and tradition. Cadets in pristine gray uniforms moved across parade grounds with mathematical precision. This place was sacred to me, a cathedral of service where young Americans transformed into officers. But today, it felt like walking into a courtroom where I'd already been judged and found wanting. I pulled into the family parking area, my rental car modest among the BMWs and Mercedes. Through the windshield, I could see them gathered in expensive coats and practiced smiles. My father, Robert, stood at the center like a patriarch holding court, silver hair immaculate, radiating corporate authority. Beside him, my mother, Margaret, adjusted her Chanel scarf, eyes scanning the crowd as if calculating social standings. My younger brother, David, leaned against his Tesla, scrolling through his phone with casual indifference. His wife, Jennifer, clutched their invitation packet, probably planning Instagram posts. They looked like a magazine spread titled "The Perfect American Family." And then there was me, the outlier in their carefully curated world. I stepped out wearing a simple navy blazer and gray slacks, professional but unremarkable. Nothing that would draw attention or upstage anyone else's moment. Old habits died hard. "Victoria," my mother's voice carried across the parking lot, bright and artificial. She approached with arms outstretched, but her embrace felt like a performance. "You made it. How was traffic from wherever you're stationed now?" The dismissiveness was surgical in its precision. She knew exactly where I worked. The Pentagon wasn't some obscure military outpost, but acknowledging my position would have complicated her narrative about her unsuccessful daughter. "Traffic was fine, Mom," I replied, keeping my voice level. "Where's Emma?" "Oh, the cadets are in final preparation," she said, already turning away. "Robert, tell Victoria about the seating arrangements." My father approached with measured strides, his handshake firm but brief. "Vic, good to see you. We need to discuss logistics." He pulled out a detailed seating chart, finger tracing the rows with corporate efficiency. "The Academy gave us excellent seats," he began, voice carrying satisfaction. "Row 3 center section, perfect view of the podium." His finger lingered on marked seats. "Margaret and I will sit here with David and Jennifer beside us, family hierarchy and all that." I waited for him to indicate my seat, though cold certainty was settling in my stomach. "Now, Vic," he continued, tone shifting to false concern, "we thought you'd be more comfortable back here." His finger moved to the rear section. "Row 27, with the extended family and others. The others, the relatives who hadn't quite achieved the family's standards. The cousins with ordinary jobs, the siblings who disappointed, the family members whose presence was tolerated rather than celebrated." David looked up from his phone, expression mixing discomfort and resignation. He knew this was wrong, but challenging our parents had never been his strength. "Maybe we could," he started, then caught Margaret's sharp look and let the sentence die. "It's fine," I said quietly, my voice carrying none of the authority that commanded respect in Pentagon briefings. Here, surrounded by people who'd known me before I learned to be strong, I felt the old familiar ache of being perpetually found lacking. But as I looked up at West Point's Gothic towers rising against the autumn sky, something inside me shifted. These walls had witnessed the commissioning of Eisenhower, MacArthur, Patton. They'd seen young Americans take oaths that would carry them to battlefields across the globe. This was a place where honor mattered more than hierarchy, where service trumped social standing. I had no idea that in less than 2 hours, everything would change. I had no idea that my mother's carefully orchestrated seating arrangement would become the setup for the most profound moment of vindication in my life. I couldn't know that the same woman who just relegated me to the back row was about to watch me walk onto that stage in front of 4,000 people. All I knew was that I was here for Emma, and that somehow, sitting in row 27 felt like the beginning of something rather than just another ending. The ceremony was about to begin, and with it, a reckoning 15 years in the making. The familiar weight of exclusion settled on my shoulders as I watched my family disperse toward the ceremony grounds. This wasn't the first time I'd been relegated to the margins of a family gathering. The pattern had started long before I wore stars on my shoulders, back when I was just a 10-year-old girl who thought excellence would be enough. The memory hit me like a physical blow, transporting me back to Lincoln Elementary School on a sweltering May afternoon in 2003. I was 10 years old, standing on a makeshift stage with a first-place ribbon pinned to my science fair project, a working water purification system I'd built from scratch in our garage. The local newspaper photographer positioned our family for the victory shot. Mom smoothed down my unruly brown hair while Dad adjusted his tie, both beaming with what I thought was pride. 8-year-old David stood beside me, fidgeting in his Sunday clothes, completely uninterested in my moment of triumph. "Tell us about your daughter's project, Mr. Sterling," the reporter said, pen poised over his notepad. That's when everything changed. Dad's hand landed on David's shoulder instead of mine. "Well, this was really a team effort," he began, voice carrying his authoritative boardroom tone. David here was the real leader of this project. He helped his sister understand the engineering principles and kept her organized throughout the process. I stood frozen, watching my father rewrite history in real time. David, who had spent exactly 20 minutes helping me paint the presentation board. David, who couldn't explain the difference between filtration and purification if his life depended on it. "David's always been our natural leader," Mom chimed in, her hand now resting protectively on my brother's back. "He has such a gift for bringing out the best in others. This project is really a testament to his collaborative spirit." The reporter scribbled notes, occasionally glancing at David with newfound interest. "And what do you want to be when you grow up, son?" "A businessman like Dad," David answered automatically, basking in unexpected attention. "And you, sweetheart?" The reporter turned to me almost as an afterthought. I opened my mouth to speak about becoming an engineer, about wanting to build things that could help people, about the dozens of late nights I'd spent testing my water filters until they worked perfectly. But Dad's hand squeezed my shoulder, a warning I felt in my bones. "Victoria's still figuring that out," he said with a dismissive chuckle. "She's got good instincts, but she needs guidance. Lucky she has David to help her find her way." The photograph that ran in the paper showed David prominently in the center, with me slightly blurred in the background. The caption read, "Local student David Sterling leads family science project to victory." My name appeared only in the fine print, listed as a team member. That night, I found Mom carefully cutting out the newspaper article in the kitchen. She placed it in the family scrapbook between David's Little League photo and his honor roll certificate. When I asked where my individual project photo would go, she looked at me with genuine confusion. But honey, this is about the family project, David's project. The pattern established itself that night like a virus in our family's operating system. Every subsequent achievement would be filtered through the same lens. When I made honor roll, it was because David had helped me study. When I won the state science Olympiad, it was because David had encouraged me. When I got into West Point, it was because David had inspired me to be more disciplined. David, to his credit, seemed genuinely uncomfortable with the stolen credit at first. But children adapt to assigned roles, and by high school, he'd grown into the mantle of family golden boy with practiced ease. He stopped protesting when our achievements were redistributed. He stopped noticing when I disappeared from family narratives entirely. The most painful part wasn't the erasure itself. It was watching David slowly begin to believe it. By the time we were teenagers, he'd convinced himself that he really had been the driving force behind my successes. The lie had calcified into his personal mythology. Standing in that West Point parking lot 15 years later, I could still taste the bitter disappointment of that elementary school gymnasium. The 10-year-old girl who'd believed that excellence would speak for itself had learned a harsh lesson. In some families, truth is negotiable, but power dynamics are carved in stone. I pulled my phone from my pocket and checked the time. The ceremony would begin in 30 minutes. Somewhere in the cadet barracks, Emma was making final preparations for her commissioning as a second lieutenant. She'd graduated in the top 5% of her class, earned a Rhodes Scholarship, and would soon lead soldiers in combat zones around the world. The Gothic spires of West Point stretched toward the cloudless sky, their stones bearing witness to generations of young Americans who'd learned to lead not through family politics, but through character forged in adversity. Today, Emma would join their ranks, and perhaps, for the first time in 15 years, excellence would finally speak for itself. But even as that hope flickered to life, 17 years of family dynamics reminded me how naive such optimism could be. In the Sterling household, excellence was a currency that could be devalued at will. The decision to attend West Point hadn't been born from patriotic inspiration. It had been an escape plan, carefully constructed, when I finally understood that no amount of achievement would ever earn my place at the family table. I was 17, sitting in our pristine living room on a February evening in 2006, holding my acceptance letter to the United States Military Academy. The thick envelope had arrived that morning, and I'd carried it around all day like a talisman. Dad was reviewing quarterly reports. Mom flipped through Town and Country magazine. David lounged on the carpet, controller in hand, half-heartedly playing some racing game. "I have something to tell you all," I began. 3 heads turned with varying degrees of attention. Dad lowered his reading glasses. Mom closed her magazine but kept one finger marking her place. "I got into West Point," I said, holding up the letter. "Full appointment. I'm going to be a cadet." The silence that followed wasn't contemplative quiet. It was the uncomfortable pause of a family trying to figure out how to react to an unwelcome surprise. Mom spoke first, her voice carrying the tone she used for David's poor grades. "Victoria, honey, that's very nice, but have you really thought this through? The military is so rough. You'll be surrounded by angry young men with no other options. It'll make you hard, course. No respectable young man from our circle will want to marry a soldier." Dad cleared his throat. "Victoria, I appreciate your sense of adventure, but let's be practical. West Point is fine for some people, but you have better opportunities." "Like what?" "David's planning to study business at Georgetown," Dad said, his voice warming when discussing my brother's future. "Maybe you could consider the same path. You could work together, take over the company as a team. David put down his controller, looking uncomfortable. Dad, maybe Vic wants to do her own thing. But Dad was already building the narrative. You've always been good at organizing things, keeping David on track. You could be his chief of staff, his right hand. The words hit like a physical blow. Even my escape plan was being reframed as preparation for a supporting role in David's success story. I don't want to be anyone's chief of staff, I said. I want to serve my country. I want to lead soldiers to make a difference that matters. Mom's laugh was like crystal breaking. Oh, sweetheart, you sound like those awful recruitment commercials. People like us serve on charity boards and write checks. We don't run around playing war games. This isn't a game, I shot back. This is about service, about sacrifice, about something bigger than quarterly profits and social standings. Dad's expression hardened. That's enough, Victoria. You're being dramatic and, frankly, ungrateful. This family has given you every advantage. The least you can do is consider how your choices affect the family reputation. What reputation? The words escaped before I could stop them. The reputation where David gets credit for everything I accomplish. The living room fell silent except for the faint sounds of David's video game. The casual indifference made everything worse. Dad stood up slowly, towering over me. You will not speak to your family that way, young lady, and you will seriously reconsider this military fantasy before you do something that affects all of us. But something had crystallized, something that felt like steel forming in my spine. I looked around at these people who shared my DNA but had never truly seen me. I'm not reconsidering anything, I said, my voice steady and clear. I'm going to West Point. I'm going to become an officer, and I'm going to prove that excellence doesn't need family permission to speak for itself. I walked out knowing I'd crossed a line that couldn't be uncrossed. Behind me, I heard Mom's voice. Robert, do something. She's ruining everything. But I was already gone. That night, I'd chosen duty over comfort, service over safety, honor over the hollow approval of people who would never truly value what I had to offer. 4 months later, I'd reported to West Point as a new cadet, ready to be broken down and rebuilt into something stronger than family politics could ever diminish. Now, 17 years later, I was back in their orbit, but the girl who'd needed their approval was long gone. Today, I would sit in row 27 and watch Emma begin her own journey where merit mattered more than bloodlines. The ceremony was about to begin, and I was ready to see what excellence looked like when it finally had the stage it deserved. That stage had been harder to reach than I'd ever imagined. As I settled into my assigned seat and watched the final preparations unfold, my mind drifted to the crucible that had forged me into the woman sitting in row 27, no longer seeking approval but quietly confident in what I'd earned through blood, sweat, and sleepless nights. West Point had been brutal in the most necessary way. The gray stone barracks that now stood majestically before me had once felt like a prison during those first brutal months. I'd arrived in July 2006 as Victoria Sterling, a 17-year-old girl desperate to prove herself. I'd graduated 4 years later as Second Lieutenant Sterling, hardened by discipline and tempered by leadership challenges that had stripped away every vestige of the approval-seeking child I'd once been. The academic rigor had been relentless. Engineering courses that pushed my mind to its limits, military history classes that taught me the weight of command decisions, leadership seminars where I learned that true authority came not from position, but from the willingness to sacrifice for those under your care. My grades placed me in the top 10%, but more importantly, my fellow cadets had voted me as someone they'd follow into combat. That trust had been tested sooner than any of us expected. Afghanistan, 2010. I was 22 years old, a lieutenant leading my first platoon in Helmand province. The Taliban had been using a remote village as a staging ground, holding 37 civilians as human shields. The mission: extract the civilians, neutralize the threat, minimize casualties. Nothing about combat is ever straightforward. We'd moved out at 3 a.m., 36 soldiers under my command threading through terrain that could hide an IED behind every rock. The weight of those lives pressed against my chest with every step. These weren't fellow cadets in training. These were real soldiers with families, trusting a 22-year-old woman to bring them back alive. The village was a maze of mud brick compounds connected by narrow alleys designed for ambush. Through my night vision, I could see thermal signatures of multiple people clustered in what appeared to be a storage room. That's when the world exploded. The Taliban had anticipated our approach, turning the rescue into a trap. Gunfire erupted from 3 directions simultaneously, muzzle flashes lighting up the darkness. My radio crackled with urgent reports. Contact left, contact right. We're taking heavy fire from the rooftops. Every leadership principle from West Point crystallized into instinct. I had seconds to make decisions that would determine who lived and who died. Rodriguez, take Alpha Team and establish overwatch on that north wall. I commanded, my voice steady despite the adrenaline. Bravo Team, suppressing fire on the rooftop positions. Charlie Team with me. We're going for the civilians. The next 20 minutes felt like hours. We moved through smoke and chaos, each corner potentially hiding death. I led Charlie Team through the compound while directing the overall battle, coordinating air support, calling for medevac, making split-second tactical decisions while bullets snapped past my head. We found the civilians huddled in a basement storage room. 37 terrified faces looking at us like salvation itself. Among them, a pregnant woman in labor and an elderly man slipping into diabetic shock. Getting them out required another 15 minutes of coordinated movement under fire. We established a casualty collection point, called in close air support, and executed a textbook extraction that saved every single civilian life. The Bronze Star citation that followed spoke of exceptional leadership and tactical acumen in the face of determined enemy resistance. But what mattered most was the handwritten note from Sergeant Rodriguez 3 weeks later. "Ma'am, I've served under a lot of officers. You're the first one I'd follow anywhere. Thank you for bringing us all home." That note meant more than any medal. It was proof that leadership wasn't about commanding respect through rank or family connections. It was about earning trust through competence, courage, and unwavering commitment to those who depend on you. I'd called home after the medal ceremony, expecting something. Acknowledgement, maybe pride. My mother had answered on the 3rd ring, her voice distracted by dinner party sounds in the background. "Oh, Victoria, how nice. David just got promoted to regional manager. We're having a celebration. Perhaps you could call back tomorrow." The line had gone dead before I could tell her about the Bronze Star, about the lives saved, about the moment when everything West Point had taught me crystallized into something real and meaningful. That was the night I stopped calling home for validation. Now, sitting in the shadow of those same towers that had shaped me, I understood that the ceremony about to begin wasn't just Emma's commissioning. It was a reminder that some stages were worth waiting for, some audiences worth the patience it took to find them. The sound of the West Point band warming up echoed across the parade grounds, brass instruments gleaming in the afternoon sun. In a few minutes, 4,000 people would witness the commissioning of America's newest officers. I had no idea that among those 4,000, someone was about to call my name. That name had carried me further than anyone in my family had ever imagined possible. As the final notes of the warm-up faded into expectant silence, my thoughts traveled back to the years that followed Afghanistan, when Victoria Sterling had become a name whispered in Pentagon corridors with respect and amazement. The promotions had come faster than military tradition typically allowed. Captain at 25, Major at 28, Lieutenant Colonel at 31. Each advancement earned through operations that pushed the boundaries of what female officers were expected to accomplish. Iraq, 2015. I was a lieutenant colonel commanding a forward operating base in Anbar province, responsible for 800 soldiers from 3 different countries. The base served as a crucial logistics hub for counter-terrorism operations across the region. The challenge wasn't just military. Many Iraqi commanders had never worked with a female American officer in authority. Some refused to attend briefings when I was present. Others tested my resolve with deliberate disrespect, waiting to see if the American woman would crack. I didn't crack. I adapted. When intelligence suggested a major ISIS cell was planning an attack on the regional power grid, I coordinated a joint operation that neutralized the threat. When supply convoys started getting hit by IEDs, I redesigned the entire logistics network, reducing casualties by 70% while improving delivery times. Within 6 months, those same Iraqi commanders who had initially dismissed me were requesting joint operations. Results spoke louder than prejudice. Success in Iraq led to an assignment at the Pentagon, where I spent 2 years helping shape military policy for next-generation warfare. My work on asymmetric warfare doctrine caught senior leadership's attention. The threats America faced were evolving rapidly. Cyber attacks, hybrid warfare, terrorism that blended with conventional tactics. I authored a classified assessment that fundamentally changed how the Department of Defense approached emerging threats. My recommendations were implemented across all military branches, from training protocols to rules of engagement. That assessment led to my promotion to colonel at 32, making me one of the youngest female colonels in Army history. I'd called home that night, ready to share news that even my family couldn't diminish. The promotion ceremony had been attended by the Secretary of Defense himself, covered by Military Times. Dad had answered in his study, classical music playing softly. "Hi, Dad. I have some news I wanted to share." "Oh, Victoria, good timing. David just closed the biggest deal in his company's history, $3.7 million. We're incredibly proud." I'd steadied myself for what felt like one final attempt at connection. "That's great, Dad. I wanted to tell you that I was promoted to colonel today. I'm now one of the youngest female colonels in the Army." There had been a pause that stretched long enough to contain entire conversations about expectations and disappointments. "That's nice, honey. Colonel, you said. Is that like a manager position?" The question hit like a physical blow. After 15 years of military service, after commanding hundreds of soldiers in combat zones, my father still had no concept of what I actually did. "Something like that, Dad," I'd said quietly. I'd listened for 10 minutes as Mom detailed the celebration they were planning for David's sales achievement. The guest list, the catering, the photographer, every detail lovingly planned. When the call ended, I'd sat in my Pentagon office and finally understood something fundamental. They weren't capable of seeing me clearly. It wasn't malicious. They simply lacked the framework to understand a world where their overlooked daughter had become someone of consequence. That realization had been strangely liberating. For the first time, I'd stopped waiting for their approval and started building relationships with people who could see and value what I brought to the table. The call from the Secretary of Defense had come on a Tuesday morning in March. I was reviewing intelligence reports when my aide informed me that the SecDef wanted to speak with me personally. Colonel Sterling, his voice had been formal but warm. "I have a question for you. How do you feel about stars?" Stars, General Stars. At 34, I would become the youngest female Brigadier General in United States Army history. I hadn't called home to share the news. Now, sitting in row 27 at Emma's graduation, I understood that some victories were too precious to risk contamination by people who had never learned to celebrate them properly. The West Point band had finished warming up, and the ceremony was about to begin in earnest. Around me, families adjusted their cameras, preparing to capture their cadet's moment of triumph. I was ready to witness excellence being honored the way it deserved, even if I was watching from the back of the room. Excellence being honored. The phrase carried a bitter irony as I settled deeper into my seat, remembering the day when my own greatest achievement had been met with the same casual indifference that had defined my entire relationship with this family. The stars had come exactly 1 year ago today, in a ceremony that should have been the culmination of everything I'd worked toward since that teenage girl had walked out of this house with nothing but determination. March 15th, 2023. The Pentagon's Hall of Heroes had been filled with dignitaries, senior military leadership, and members of Congress. Secretary of Defense James Morrison himself had presided over the ceremony. By the authority vested in me by the President of the United States, I hereby promote Colonel Victoria Sterling to the rank of Brigadier General, United States Army. At 34, I was the youngest female Brigadier General in Army history. The achievement represented not just personal success, but a breakthrough for every woman who would follow in my footsteps. The reception afterward had been attended by Pentagon officials, fellow general officers, and journalists. The story had run on front pages everywhere. Barrier breaker, youngest female general makes history. But the people who should have mattered most were conspicuously absent. I'd sent the invitation 3 weeks in advance, along with a personal note explaining the ceremony's significance. The response had come from my mother's assistant, a polite decline citing a prior commitment that turned out to be David's company golf tournament. David's golf tournament had taken precedence over their daughter becoming the youngest female general in Army history. That evening, sitting alone in my Arlington apartment, I'd finally understood that some people were incapable of recognizing excellence when it didn't fit their predetermined narrative of success. I'd called Emma instead. Aunt Vic. Her voice had been bright with excitement. "I saw the ceremony on the Army's YouTube channel. Oh my God, you looked so badass walking up there. I'm so proud of you." "Thank you, sweetheart. That means more to me than you know." "Are you kidding? You're my hero. I've been telling everyone at the academy about my aunt, the general." Some of the guys didn't believe me until I showed them the news articles. Emma's genuine pride had filled a void I hadn't even realized existed. Here was someone who understood that achievements should be celebrated, not diminished based on family politics. "How are your grandparents handling the news?" I'd asked, though I already knew the answer. "Honestly, I don't think they really understand what it means. Grandma asked if being a general was like being a CEO, and Grandpa wanted to know if you get a company car." We'd both laughed, but there had been sadness in it too. They're planning this huge celebration for Dad's promotion to regional director. Emma had continued, frustration creeping into her voice. 300 people, live band, the whole thing. But when I told them about your promotion, Grandma just said that's nice, dear, and went back to discussing flower arrangements. The conversation had lasted 2 hours, Emma peppering me with questions about military leadership, combat operations, and what it was like being the only woman in senior strategy meetings. Her curiosity was infectious, her respect genuine. That night, I'd realized that family isn't always about blood. Sometimes it's about finding people who see your worth and celebrate your victories without needing explanations. The irony wasn't lost on me that a year later, I was sitting in the back row while my parents occupied seats of honor in the front. The same parents who had missed my promotion ceremony were here to bask in reflected glory from Emma's achievement. But Emma understood. Emma saw me clearly, respected what I'd accomplished, and valued the sacrifices I'd made. She represented the next generation of leaders who would judge people by character and accomplishments rather than adherence to family expectations. Around me, other families chatted excitedly about their cadets. Mothers wiped away proud tears. Fathers checked their cameras. Siblings fidgeted impatiently. I sat quietly, hands folded in my lap, wearing civilian clothes that revealed nothing about the star on my shoulder or the battles I'd fought to earn it. To anyone looking, I appeared to be exactly what my family had always claimed, the unremarkable daughter, relegated to the margins. They had no idea that the woman in row 27 commanded Pentagon respect, that my strategic assessments influenced national security policy, that I'd earned my place through competence and courage rather than connections. But they were about to find out. The processional music began, signaling the ceremony's start. 4,000 people rose as the Corps of Cadets began their march onto the field, synchronized steps echoing off West Point's stone walls with mathematical precision. Emma was somewhere in those perfectly aligned ranks, about to take the oath that would transform her from cadet to officer. In a few hours, she would join the long gray line of leaders who had graduated from this institution and gone on to serve with honor. I was ready to watch her moment of triumph, even if mine had been celebrated in solitude. But today's gathering reminded me how carefully orchestrated my family's dynamics truly were. The ceremony unfolding before us was magnificent, yet my mind drifted to the planning call 3 weeks ago that had determined exactly where each family member would sit for this momentous occasion. Mom's voice had carried that particular tone she reserved for family logistics. "Victoria, we need to discuss seating arrangements for Emma's graduation." I'd set down my coffee, already sensing the familiar pattern. "Of course. What do you need to know?" "Well, the Academy has given us excellent seats in the third row center section. Your father and I will sit there naturally along with David and Jennifer. It's important that we present the right image for Emma." The right image, as if our family's appearance somehow reflected on Emma's 4 years of excellence. "That sounds wonderful, Mom. Where would you like me to sit?" There had been a pause just long enough to signal discomfort. "Well, dear, that's what I wanted to discuss. You understand how these things work. There's a certain protocol to consider." Protocol. In my world, protocol meant the difference between mission success and failure. In theirs, it meant maintaining social hierarchies. "The thing is, Victoria, your father has some very important clients attending. The Weatherbys, the Montgomerys, the Ashfords, people who could be significant for David's career advancement." I'd waited, knowing exactly where this conversation was heading. "So we thought it would be best if you sat with the extended family section. Uncle Richard and Aunt Patricia, Cousin Michael and his family, you'll be much more comfortable there. Uncle Richard, who'd been passed over for promotion for years. Aunt Patricia, who spent family gatherings discussing her cats. Cousin Michael, who managed a sporting goods store. They weren't bad people, they were just ordinary. And in the Sterling family hierarchy, ordinary was where they'd decided I belonged." "I see," I'd said, my voice carefully neutral. "And this extended family section is located where?" "Oh, it's perfectly fine seating. Row 27, I believe. You'll have a lovely view of everything. Row 27, the back of the assembly area, where the academy seated distant relatives and plus ones who didn't warrant premium placement. Mom, you do realize what I do for a living. Another pause, shorter but loaded with irritation. Of course I do, dear. You work for the government. Very stable, very respectable. But this isn't about careers, Victoria. This is about family presentation. Family presentation. The woman who'd given birth to the youngest female general in Army history was concerned about family presentation. David's company is sending a photographer, she'd continued. The pictures will be used in their corporate newsletter, possibly their annual report. We need to show unity, success, the kind of family that produces leaders. The kind of family that produces leaders. I'd almost laughed. It's not personal, Victoria. It's just that David's career is at such a crucial juncture. He's being considered for vice president, and these relationships matter. David's theoretical promotion trumped his sister's actual promotion to general. The mathematics of their priorities couldn't have been clearer. I understand completely, Mom, I'd said. I'll sit wherever you think is best. The relief in her voice had been audible. Oh, wonderful, I knew you'd understand. You've always been so practical about these things. Practical, that was her word for my willingness to be invisible when my presence might complicate their narrative. 3 days later, Emma had called me directly. Aunt Vic, what's this nonsense about you sitting in the back? You're a general. You've served our country in combat. You should be sitting in the front row, not hidden away like some embarrassing relative. Her indignation had been touching, but I'd learned long ago that fighting family politics was a battle with no winners. Emma, your graduation day should be about you and your achievements. Don't let seating charts distract from that. Now, watching the ceremony unfold, I understood that today had never really been about honoring Emma's achievement. It was about maintaining the family image, preserving the hierarchy, ensuring that David's corporate prospects remained unblemished. The opening remarks were beginning, delivered by West Point's superintendent to an audience of 4,000 people. Around me, the extended family section murmured quietly, grateful to be included. I sat in silence, hands folded in my lap, ready to watch my niece take her oath from the vantage point my family had deemed appropriate for someone of my limited significance. They had no idea that in less than an hour, the Secretary of Defense himself would be calling my name. That name would soon echo across these hallowed grounds in ways my family could never have anticipated. But for now, I remained invisible in row 27, watching as 4,000 people rose to their feet for the most sacred tradition in American military education. The West Point Corps of Cadets began their march onto the parade field, their movements a study in precision and discipline. 850 young Americans stepped in perfect synchronization across the emerald grass. The sound of their boots striking the ground in unison created a rhythm that pulsed with the heartbeat of the nation itself. Emma was somewhere in those gray ranks, though from my distance I couldn't pick her out among the sea of identical uniforms. She'd worked 4 years for this moment, surviving the academic rigor, the physical demands, the leadership challenges that transformed teenagers into officers. The superintendent, Lieutenant General Patricia Hayes, approached the podium with the bearing of someone who'd earned her stars through decades of exemplary service. Ladies and gentlemen, welcome to the commissioning ceremony for the United States Military Academy Class of 2024. Today, we witness the culmination of 4 years of rigorous preparation as these young men and women prepare to join the long gray line. Around me, families leaned forward in their seats, cameras raised to capture every moment. Parents wiped away tears of pride. Siblings bounced with excitement. The energy was electric, infectious, a celebration that transcended individual families. 3 rows ahead, I could see my father's silver head as he adjusted his expensive camera. My mother sat beside him, picture perfect in her navy blue suit and pearls. David and Jennifer flanked them, both posting social media updates about this incredible family moment. They looked like the embodiment of American success, wealthy, accomplished, surrounded by other elite families. The irony that their own daughter sat anonymously in the back would have been lost on them entirely. General Hayes continued her remarks, outlining the rigorous selection process. She spoke of academic excellence, physical fitness, moral character, and leadership potential. These young officers have demonstrated not just intellectual ability, but the moral courage to lead others in the most challenging circumstances. They have chosen service over self, duty over comfort, honor over ease. Her words resonated deeply, reminding me why I'd chosen this path despite my family's incomprehension. Military service wasn't about recognition or applause. It was about the opportunity to be part of something larger than yourself. The ceremony continued with remarks from distinguished guests. A Medal of Honor recipient spoke about leadership in combat. A former Secretary of State discussed military officers' role in global security. A retired 4-star general emphasized the importance of character. My family was treating this like an enhanced graduation ceremony, a prestigious photo opportunity for their social circles. They had no concept of what Emma would face as a second lieutenant, the responsibility she'd bear for soldiers under her command. But Emma understood. Emma had chosen this path with full knowledge of what it entailed. The ceremony was building toward its climax, the commissioning itself. But first, there would be the presentation of special awards for cadets who had demonstrated exceptional performance. General Hayes returned to the podium, her expression more formal now. Before we proceed to the commissioning ceremony, it is my privilege to present several special awards to cadets who have distinguished themselves through outstanding achievement. She began with the Rhodes Scholarship recipients, calling each name with obvious pride. Then came academic awards, recognizing cadets who had excelled in engineering, international affairs, and military science. As the ceremony continued, I felt a strange sense of anticipation building. Something about the formal progression, the careful protocol, the distinguished guests suggested that today held surprises beyond the standard commissioning ceremony. I noticed movement among the VIP section, official-looking individuals with earpieces positioning themselves near the platform. Security details that suggested someone very important was about to make an appearance. General Hayes paused, consulting her notes before looking up with barely contained excitement. "Ladies and gentlemen, we have a very special honor to bestow today. An award that recognizes not just individual achievement, but service that has brought distinction to both the recipient and the institution itself." My heart began to beat faster, though I couldn't have explained why. Around me, the crowd grew quieter, sensing that something significant was about to occur. It is my great privilege to introduce a distinguished guest who will present today's most prestigious honor. The side doors of the platform opened, and a figure in dress uniform stepped into view. Even from my position in the back, I recognized him immediately. Secretary of Defense James Morrison, the highest-ranking civilian in the Department of Defense. The crowd erupted in spontaneous applause as Secretary Morrison approached the microphone, his presence transforming the ceremony from impressive to historic. Historic was exactly the right word, though not for the reasons the assembled families imagined. As Secretary Morrison adjusted the microphone and surveyed the crowd, I felt a familiar tightness in my chest, the same sensation before every major operation, when the stakes were highest and failure wasn't an option. "Thank you, General Hayes," Morrison began, his voice carrying easily across the parade field. "It's my honor to be here today to witness the commissioning of America's newest officers. But before we proceed, I have the privilege of presenting a very special award." He paused, allowing anticipation to build among the 4,000 assembled guests. Parents leaned forward, cameras focused on the podium. Even the cadets in formation seemed to straighten with additional pride. "The MacArthur Award for Exceptional Leadership in Military Service," Morrison continued, "is not presented annually. In fact, it has only been awarded 3 times in the past decade. This honor recognizes an individual whose service has fundamentally advanced the security interests of the United States through innovative thinking, courageous leadership, and unwavering dedication to duty." I found myself holding my breath. Around me, the extended family section murmured with excitement. Uncle Richard whispered to Aunt Patricia about what an honor it was just to witness such a prestigious ceremony. 3 rows ahead, I could see my father's posture stiffen with interest. My mother adjusted her pearls and smoothed her skirt, apparently concerned about appearing on camera. "This year's recipient," Morrison said, his voice taking on a more formal tone, "has served with distinction in some of the most challenging environments our military has faced. Their strategic innovations in asymmetric warfare have been adopted across all branches of the armed forces." The secretary paused again, consulting his notes. When he looked up, there was something in his expression that made my heart rate accelerate dramatically. More recently, this officer's classified assessment of emerging threats fundamentally changed how our department approaches 21st century challenges. Their work has influenced policy at the highest levels of government. A classified assessment of emerging threats. The blood began to drain from my face as I realized what was happening. That assessment, my assessment, had been circulated only among senior Pentagon leadership. Fewer than 50 people in the entire government had clearance to read it. "Ladies and gentlemen," Morrison said, his voice now carrying unmistakable pride, "this year's MacArthur Award recipient exemplifies everything we hope to see in military leadership: innovation, courage, integrity, and an unwavering commitment to service before self." The crowd had grown completely silent, hanging on every word. At 34 years old, this officer became the youngest female brigadier general in United States Army history. Their career has been marked by groundbreaking achievements that have opened doors for the next generation of military leaders. My mouth went dry. The world around me seemed to slow down, the way it did in combat when adrenaline sharpened every sense to crystal clarity. This couldn't be happening. Not here. Not in front of my family. Morrison's eyes swept across the crowd, and for a moment that lasted an eternity, his gaze seemed to find mine in row 27. "It is my distinct honor to call forward the recipient of this year's MacArthur Award for Exceptional Leadership in Military Service." He paused one final time, the silence stretching until it became almost unbearable. "Brigadier General Victoria Sterling, United States Army." The words hit the crowd like a physical shockwave. For a moment, there was complete silence as 4,000 people processed what they'd just heard. Then, slowly, heads began to turn, searching the crowd for the recipient of this unprecedented honor. I remained seated, frozen in place by the magnitude of what had just occurred. Around me, the extended family section erupted in confused whispers. Uncle Richard turned to Aunt Patricia with a bewildered expression. but it was the reaction from the front rows that would be seared into my memory forever. I watched as my father's head snapped around, his expensive camera forgotten as he searched the crowd with wild eyes. My mother's hand flew to her mouth, her carefully composed expression cracking like ice in spring. David half rose from his seat, turning to scan the assembly area with obvious confusion. Jennifer grabbed his arm, pointing toward the back where a few people had begun to applaud, unsure of protocol but sensing they were witnessing history. Secretary Morrison's voice cut through the growing murmur. "General Sterling, would you please join me on the platform?" The moment of truth had arrived. I could remain seated, claiming some sort of misunderstanding. I could disappear into the crowd and deal with this privately later, or I could stand up and claim the recognition I'd earned through 15 years of service to my country. The choice, when it came, was easier than I'd expected. I rose from my seat in row 27, my movement causing a ripple of awareness to spread through the crowd like wildfire. As I stepped into the aisle and began the long walk toward the platform, I heard the first tentative applause begin somewhere behind me. By the time I reached the front of the assembly area, 4,000 people were on their feet, their applause thundering across the parade field like artillery fire. All except 3 people in the third row, who remained seated in stunned, horrified silence. The contrast was striking. Thousands standing in thunderous applause while my family sat frozen in shock. As I walked across the parade field toward the platform, each step felt like crossing a battlefield where the outcome would reshape everything they thought they knew about power, achievement, and worth. The walk seemed to stretch for miles, though it couldn't have been more than 50 yards. With every stride, I felt the weight of 4,000 pairs of eyes tracking my movement. Some faces showed confusion as they tried to reconcile the unremarkable woman from the back rows with the prestigious award being presented. Secretary Morrison waited at the podium with the bearing of a man accustomed to making history. As I approached the steps, he descended to meet me halfway, extending his hand in greeting. "General Sterling," he said, his voice warm with genuine respect. "It's an honor to finally meet you in person. Your work has made a profound impact on our national security." "The honor is mine, Mr. Secretary," I replied, my voice steady despite the surreal nature of the moment. As we walked up the platform steps together, Morrison continued speaking, his words intended for the crowd, but clearly meant to establish context. "General Sterling's innovations in counterterrorism strategy have been implemented in 7 different combat theaters. Her assessment of emerging cyber warfare threats led to a complete restructuring of our defensive capabilities. At 34, she commands the respect of 4-star generals with decades more experience. From the platform, I could see everything. The sea of upturned faces, the forest of raised cameras, the media personnel who had materialized to document this unexpected moment. And there, in the third row, the frozen tableau of my family. My father sat rigid as a statue, his expensive camera hanging forgotten around his neck. His face had gone completely white, his mouth hanging slightly open as if he'd suffered some sort of neurological event. For a man who prided himself on maintaining composure in business situations, he looked utterly shattered. My mother's carefully constructed facade had crumbled entirely. Her hands shook as she clutched her handbag, and tears streamed down her cheeks, ruining her perfect makeup. Whether they were tears of shock, shame, or belated pride, I couldn't tell. David and Jennifer sat beside them, both frantically whispering while trying to process what they were witnessing. David kept looking from me to his phone, apparently fact-checking what he was seeing. Secretary Morrison's voice brought my attention back to the ceremony. The MacArthur Award recognizes not just professional achievement, but character under pressure. General Sterling has demonstrated both in abundance. During her deployment to Iraq, she commanded a forward operating base responsible for over 800 personnel from multiple nations. Under her leadership, casualties decreased by 70%, while mission effectiveness increased dramatically. The crowd listened in rapt attention as Morrison continued detailing accomplishments my family had never bothered to learn about. Each achievement felt like vindication of the girl who had once won a science fair, only to watch her brother receive the credit. Morrison paused, reaching for something behind the podium. When he turned back, he held an elegant wooden box containing the MacArthur Award itself, a crystal eagle mounted on polished obsidian, catching the afternoon sunlight like captured fire. "General Sterling," he said, his voice carrying across the field with formal gravity, "by the authority vested in me as Secretary of Defense, I present you with the MacArthur Award for exceptional leadership in military service, in recognition of your distinguished career and invaluable contributions to the security of the United States of America." As he placed the award in my hands, the weight seemed to represent more than crystal and stone. It was the physical manifestation of 15 years of service, sacrifice, and silent perseverance. It was proof that excellence didn't require family approval to be real. The crowd erupted in another wave of applause, but this time it was different. This wasn't polite ceremony clapping. This was the sound of 4,000 people recognizing they had just witnessed something historic. I stepped to the microphone, knowing that whatever I said next would be recorded and remembered. "Thank you, Mr. Secretary," I began, my voice carrying easily across the field. "This honor belongs not just to me, but to every soldier who has served with courage, to every family who has supported their service members' calling, and to every leader who understands that true strength comes from lifting others up rather than pushing them down." My eyes found Emma in the ranks of cadets, her face beaming with undisguised pride. She was witnessing not just her aunt receiving recognition, but a demonstration that the path she had chosen, service over safety, duty over comfort, led to real honor. As the applause continued, I looked once more toward the third row. My father was slowly rising to his feet, his movement mechanical. My mother followed, then David and Jennifer, until finally, my entire family stood among the thousands offering recognition. But their applause came not from pride or joy. It came from the shock of realizing that for 34 years, they had been systematically overlooking someone extraordinary. The ceremony was far from over, but this moment would change everything that came after. Everything that came after began the moment I stepped down from the platform, the MacArthur Award still warm in my hands. The ceremony continued with Emma's commissioning, but I barely registered the formal proceedings. My mind was focused on the inevitable confrontation that would follow this public revelation. As the newly commissioned officers threw their caps into the air, I found myself surrounded by congratulating strangers. Fellow military families, dignitaries, even West Point faculty approached to shake my hand. Each interaction created a buffer between me and the three people I could sense approaching through the crowd. "Aunt Vic," Emma's voice cut through the chaos as she broke away from her celebrating classmates, still wearing her new second lieutenant's bars. She threw her arms around me with uninhibited joy. "I can't believe you didn't tell me. I knew you were amazing, but the MacArthur Award. Do you know how incredible this is?" "I know exactly how incredible it is," I replied, holding her tightly. "And I'm proud to share this day with you, Lieutenant Sterling." "Victoria," the voice behind me was carefully controlled, but I could hear the tremor beneath my father's composed facade. I turned to face him, still holding Emma close. Robert Sterling looked like a man who had aged a decade in the past hour. His usually immaculate appearance was disheveled, his face carrying the pallor of someone whose fundamental understanding of reality had just crumbled. "Dad," I said simply. "We need to talk," he said, glancing around at the crowd. "Privately." "Actually," I replied, my voice carrying the authority I'd learned in command situations, "I think we've had enough private conversations. Anything you need to say can be said here." His jaw tightened, but he seemed to recognize that the dynamics had fundamentally shifted. "Why didn't you tell us?" The question came from my mother, who had approached during our exchange. Eleanor's usual perfect composure was completely shattered. Her makeup was streaked, her hands shook visibly. "Tell you what, Mom, that you had achieved." She struggled to find words. "The Secretary of Defense knows who you are. You're famous." Famous. In her world, that was the highest achievement possible. "I tried to tell you," I said quietly. "For 15 years, I tried to share my career with you. But every time I called with news about a promotion or decoration, you were too busy celebrating David's latest sales achievement." David himself had finally approached, looking smaller somehow, diminished by the revelation that his marginalized sister was someone genuinely extraordinary. "Vic, we didn't know," he said, his voice desperate. "If we had known." "You would have what?" I interrupted. "You would have treated me differently. You would have stopped taking credit for my achievements." He flinched. "You never meant to hurt me," I finished. "But intent doesn't erase impact. The impact was that I spent my entire adult life feeling invisible in my own family." "We want to make this right," my father said, his voice carrying the tone he used in business negotiations. "Whatever it takes." "Dad, this isn't about our family. This is about what I accomplished, despite our family." The words hung in the air like a challenge. For the first time in my life, I had spoken the complete truth about our relationship. "You don't understand," my mother said, her voice rising with familiar injured self-righteousness. "We've always been proud of you." "You showed it perfectly," I replied. "Every time you put me in the back row, every time you dismissed my career as administrative work, every time you chose David's golf tournament over my promotion ceremony." The specific reference hit home. I watched my father's face as he realized I knew about their deliberate choice. "We can fix this," he insisted. "I'm sure you can," I said, my voice gentler now but no less firm. "And I hope you do, for Emma's sake. She deserves a family that celebrates her achievements." I looked at each of them in turn, but I'm done trying to earn recognition from people who have had 34 years to give it freely. I found my family among people who value service over status. Emma squeezed my arm, her eyes bright with understanding. She represented the future, a new generation that would judge people by their actions rather than adherence to family expectations. The conversation was far from over, but the terms had been permanently reset. I was no longer the daughter seeking approval. I was a general who had earned her place through merit. The late afternoon sun was beginning to cast long shadows across the West Point parade field, signaling that this momentous day was drawing to a close. But some days never truly end. They transform into new beginnings. As the shadows lengthened across the parade field and families began their journeys home, I understood that what had transpired here would ripple forward in ways none of us could fully anticipate. 6 months later, Emma walked into my Pentagon office wearing her dress blues with the confident bearing of an officer who had found her purpose. "General Sterling," she began, "I wanted to update you on the family situation. Mom and Dad have been attending counseling sessions to understand how their actions affected you," she continued. Dad cleared out his home office and turned it into a display room with every newspaper article about your career, your commendations, even a photo from the MacArthur Award ceremony. He calls it the General's Gallery. The image was both touching and ironic. My father creating a shrine to achievements he'd spent decades ignoring. And Mom's been volunteering with military family support groups. She's actually listening instead of just talking about charity galas. What about David? He stepped back from the family business and started working with a nonprofit providing job training for veterans. He says he needs to do something meaningful instead of chasing promotions. Emma painted a picture of a family slowly attempting to make amends through quiet, consistent efforts rather than grand gestures. "I'm not asking you to forgive them," she concluded. "I'm just letting you know that your moment at West Point changed how our family sees itself." After she left, my phone buzzed with a text from an unknown number. "Saw your interview on CNN about women in military leadership. You inspired my daughter to apply to West Point. Thank you for showing her that barriers are meant to be broken. A grateful father." This was the real impact, not belated family recognition, but the effect on young women who now saw new possibilities. These messages from strangers who found hope in my story were what truly mattered. I thought about that 10-year-old girl at the science fair, watching her brother receive credit for her work. She couldn't have imagined that one day her leadership would save lives in combat zones, that her strategic assessments would influence national security policy, that her story would inspire others to pursue careers in service. Excellence had finally spoken for itself, not through family approval, but through lives touched, barriers broken, and paths cleared for those who would follow. The next morning brought a handwritten letter from my mother, 3 pages acknowledging the extraordinary daughter she'd failed to see and expressing hope for a new relationship built on mutual respect rather than old expectations. I filed the letter in my desk drawer, neither discarding it nor rushing to respond. Healing would take time, trust would have to be rebuilt slowly, but for the first time in decades, the possibility existed. That evening, at a retirement ceremony for a fellow general, I looked around at my colleagues, men and women who had served with honor, who understood sacrifice, who measured worth by character rather than connections or social standing. This was my chosen family. This was where I belonged. And whether my biological family learned to accept that or not, I was complete. As the ceremony concluded and we filed out into the Washington night, I realized that the girl who had once sat in row 27 seeking validation had become a woman who created her own recognition through service, integrity, and unwavering commitment to excellence. True honor isn't awarded by family members who finally recognize your worth after public validation. It's earned through service to something greater than yourself, through quiet courage to persist when no one is watching, through the strength to remain true to your values regardless of who approves. Your worth isn't determined by those who refuse to see it. Your story matters, your service counts, and your excellence speaks for itself, even when it takes 34 years for some people to finally listen. If this story resonated with you, if you've ever felt overlooked or undervalued by those closest to you, please know that your journey has meaning beyond their recognition. Share your thoughts in the comments below, and subscribe to Honor Vindicated for more stories of resilience, courage, and the triumph of merit over expectation. Sometimes the most powerful victory isn't forcing others to see your worth. It's learning to see it yourself and living it fully, regardless of who's watching from the front row or the back. Remember, you are exactly as extraordinary as your actions prove you to be.